There's a common thread between the Steelers' free agent moves that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin have been putting together that I don't think we've talked about enough yet. And I want to discuss that right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll talk about that common link, and we'll answer a lot of your questions on a Mailbag Wednesday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things at the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday options, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise, this is the game for you. Download the game by visiting ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use the promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, all caps, all one word, in the game. Be sure to check out Ultimate Football GM. We'll talk about it more in the show. Now, let's talk about some moves that the Steelers' actual GM have made. And we've been talking about them. We've gone over them as they've happened, reported them, and given some different dispositions as far as how they're going to fit onto the roster. But I think there's another element that we need to discuss about it, and especially when it comes to not necessarily DeMonte Casey and Larry Ogunjobi, because they've been there and we thought they would be guys that they could resign. But especially with Patrick Peterson, especially with Elandon Roberts, especially with Cole Holcomb, especially with Isaac Semaulo, Nate Herbig. I think he's still a good signing, but this isn't as much pertaining to him. But I think a big thing that's going on here that's a common link between those four players, because they're four different players as far as what they do. I'd say Elandon Roberts and Cole Holcomb are similar. But I think the thing that links them is their leadership qualities and the potential for their leadership qualities to work with what's going to be a young Steelers roster. Now, yes, there are guys who are going to be on the Steelers roster that aren't young. Cam Hayward, he's been around for a long time. He's carrying that torch. And none of these guys are going to take his place as a leader on the team. TJ Watt, and he's been around. He don't need nobody to lead him. Minka Fitzpatrick's another one. But I think one thing that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin wanted to do with their free agent additions is they wanted to bring in guys who they didn't have to, like, if you looked at their character quotient, what their notes were from the other teams that they were bringing them in from, they're guys you don't got to worry about. They're guys that are, they made their hay by being detailed workers and by being real students of their craft. And I think that's what you look across the board and you see it. And if you go back and look at the thumbnail for this episode, you'll see Patrick Peterson and Elandon Roberts and Cole Holcomb all wearing C's on the chests of their jerseys, because they were captains on the team, because they were detail-oriented types of players. Now, Semaulo wasn't a captain because, Jason Kelce was on his offensive line, and there's a lot more players there. But I think Semaulo's a guy who could be that person to lean on for a young Steelers offensive line. I still anticipate the Steelers to add an offensive tackle who will go into training camp as with a good chance to beat out Dan Moore Jr. You still got James Daniels in his mid-20s, Mason Cole in his mid-20s, Chuks Okorafor in his mid-20s, and then Nate Herbig and Kevin Dotson also in their mid-20s. You got those guys, and then if you bring in Semaulo, he's in his late 20s, and he has experience on a team that just went to the Super Bowl, where the vibe that you got from people who wanted to talk about him was that he could have been a leader on that offensive line if Jason Kelce wasn't around, especially for the interior guys. But one thing that I've noted for years is that I think the Steelers have started to make this consistent push to get character guys who they know are going to be great locker room leaders and set the tone for everybody else. And that's not everybody. There's certain picks they can't do that with. But you go back to their pick of Najee Harris. And a lot of people complaining because they drafted a running back in the first round. I think they drafted Najee Harris because he's not just a really good running back, but he's also the kind of guy that you want in your locker room who plays the running back position, who isn't just all about himself, who works with his team, who sets the example and hypes his teammates up and is a great teammate for them. Kenny Pickett, the same way. Funny enough, they're back-to-back first-round picks. And I'll share with you a story that of a friend of mine, Chris Peak. He's been covering the Pitt Panthers for years, longer than I have, with PantherLair.com. Go check out their work because they do a lot of great stuff. But, he was telling me a story about how he got from Jake O'Neal, who's a really good offensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings, used to play at Pitt. And when O'Neal was finishing his career at Pitt, Kenny Pickett was a freshman, and he was getting his first playing time. And he said in the game, one thing he noticed about Kenny Pickett, despite being a freshman, was in the huddle, and he grabbed the guy's face mask and got in his face and was telling him to focus and to lock in and putting that pressure there. And he was like, whoa, that guy's different as a freshman. He's doing that kind of stuff. He's taking the reins as far as being a leader. And I think that's a big part of why the Steelers really liked Kenny Pickett, beyond just his any athletic abilities and any ability to read the field, is how he carried himself as a leader, what he expected of himself and his teammates. And I think when you look at guys like Patrick Peterson, there's no question that guy knows what he's doing in the NFL. He's going to be in the right spots, and he can help others be in the right spot. I think Semaulo, I think he's going to be a guy that this offensive line tees off of and can build together with moving forward. Both Roberts and Holcomb were guys on their teams, and they weren't the best players on their teams, but these were guys that their teammates could depend upon. These were guys that you could call on and say, hey, this guy's going, whatever happens, this guy's going to be in the right spot. This guy's going to handle that job. And I think that's something that the Steelers want to make sure of right now, especially, that with all these young players that you're hoping become, the future of this organization, like Kenny Pickett, like Najee Harris, and like all these other guys, and then even players like George Pickens that you've drafted. And George Pickens may not be that kind of guy. He's more of a playmaker who, will fight for his teammates, but not necessarily the leadership type quotient just yet. But I think when you bring a lot more guys like that, you bring all these good locker room presences into your locker room, where you have a lot of young, impressionable players who are developing their character as NFL athletes. I think you're setting yourself up to build a positive cultural environment and then set the stage for your young guys to continue carrying that environment when they become the leaders. And again, not to say that Cam Hayward hasn't done that, because I think he has. Not to say that TJ Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick and guys who've been there aren't working to do that, because I think they have. But I think right now, when you can get guys who are talented but also are good guys to have in the locker room and detailed guys to have around and at reasonable prices, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it builds you towards something where you can look back and say, hey, you know what? These guys are going to help everyone else around them get better. These guys are going to be detailed, and they're going to carry themselves the way that we want some of the younger guys and some of the rookies that they'll be drafting to carry themselves. So again, just looking at the character, the more I talk to people, from that cover these other teams, like we've had David Harrison from Locked On Commanders talk about Holcomb on this show. We've had Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings talk about Patrick Peterson on this show. I think that's something that should not be overlooked and is important in the final equation as far as what the Steelers are doing in free agency. And I still don't think they're done in free agency. And I think there's some questions in our mailbag that are going to talk about some of these free agency decisions. We'll talk about that in a little bit and how it impacts what the Steelers could do with the rest of free agency and what they will do with the NFL draft, as well as maybe some standings as far as, are they actually better now from what they've done? All that and more will come in our mailbag segments coming up right here. So stick around. Maybe your question, if you called into the show, was answered here. We'll find out in just a minute. But first, love to talk to you guys about one of our great sponsors, and that's FanDuel. And of course, FanDuel is the #1 sports book in America. If you want to check out FanDuel Sportsbook, you can go in, download the app, and new customers, if you haven't used it before, you get a chance to have the no sweat first bet, which gets you up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if you miss on your first bet. So you can do all of that by downloading the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can get on any of your mobile devices. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to how many three-pointers are drained in a basketball game. They have NBA games, March Madness games, all the games that you can want right now in hoop season. this is your chance to get on it. FanDuel lets you make player prop bets and gives you so many options to bet on and make money from. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at bigger payouts with same-game parlays. Don't miss out on the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get to the mailbag questions because there's some really good ones in here. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who does call into the show. I do apologize. We didn't get to do a lot of mailbag while I was on the road. As you see, I'm finally back home. I'm no longer on the road. I was on the road for 3 weeks at the Combine and then at the ACC tournament and then following March Madness. And that was a great experience, but I'm happy to sleep in my own bed and to work at my own desk now. So now that we're doing that, I had time to comb through a lot of the questions you've been leaving over the past couple weeks, and we got to some right here. Here's our friend James from Pennsylvania, who has a very good question that ties into a move the Steelers could make in free agency, but also could make in the NFL draft. Here's James.
Hey, Chris, this is James from Pennsylvania. My question is, as of right now, Terrell Edmunds is not signed yet. So do you think the Steelers will go ahead and try to draft Brian Branch, who did say that he would like to play with Minkah Fitzpatrick? Or do you think that we'll still sign Terrell Edmunds? Or even go after one of the other safeties in the class? Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, James, for your question. And remember, if you ever want to call into the show, all you have to do is call in 412-223-6644 and leave your name, where you're from, and what your question is. Keep it under a minute in your question. You have a better chance to get on the show. But, James, to answer your question, I think the Steelers are going to do what they did last year with Terrell Edmunds. And it's nothing personal. It's just the business of how they're going to do things, and that they know Terrell Edmunds, he's paid his dues in the NFL. He's shown that he's a competent NFL safety. He's not a turnover creator. He's not going to make the big splash plays, but he will be where you need him to be, and he will make plays against the run and plays against the pass, and he still has really good athleticism and really good size, and he's still young. He's like 25 years old. He's at the right age that you want to sign a guy who can be with your team for another 4 or 5 years and still be at his athletic height at least. But the issue is that because he doesn't have those splash plays, and safety is just a very tough free agent market to score in unless you're a superstar type of player or even a star type of player, it is tough to make your money in that market. And with Terrell Edmunds' stats, I think that he's up against it. And the Steelers knew this last year. The Steelers let him hit free agency then. They let him sit around, and eventually they scooped him up. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. If someone wants to pay him good money, they will. And I think Terrell Edmunds does deserve to get paid. Not like super money, like $10 million, nothing like that a year. But I'm thinking he deserves a good veteran contract. And I think it would behoove the Steelers to bring him in for a good 3-year, $5 million a year deal where he gets paid really well over the next few years. But again, this is a business, and then you're sitting here, the Steelers. Do you lock yourself into that situation when you know you have Minkah Fitzpatrick and Damontae Kazee, or do you keep the door open for, as James said, a Brian Branch situation where, say, all your defensive line, offensive line, receivers, cornerbacks, all those options are just off the board at 17th overall, and there's no really good trade options for you, but Brian Branch is sitting there. And yes, he did say he wants to play with Minkah Fitzpatrick, and his tape is really good from Alabama. Didn't have a great combine, but he shows the ability to be a playmaker and to play in different schemes to help in this line, to help as a strong safety, to be that kind of a guy. Would you pass that up? And then there's also, you can go get other safeties in this draft class. That is also another option as well. And there's not pressure on that safety to be a supreme starter who's making all the plays, especially when you have Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is the star of your secondary, and you have Damontae Kazee already coming back at this point. So I think to answer your question, James, I think that the Steelers, the position the Steelers have put themselves in that they are very comfortable with, is that they are going to wait to see if they can hit in the draft, and then if Terrell Edmunds is tired of waiting around for another deal from someone else, they'll sign him back. He'll probably get like a 1-year deal, maybe $4 some million. and then we'll do this dance all over again next year. Which, yeah, that's unfair to Terrell Edmunds. I think he's more than earned a good multi-year veteran contract. But I think the Steelers are playing the game where they're like, you know what? If no one's going to force our hand to have to pay this guy a lot of money, we're not going to pay this guy a lot of money. And again, I like Terrell Edmunds. I think he's a really good dude. I think he's another guy that's a good role player in your locker room who sets a good tone for everybody else. And again, he's a detail-oriented guy. You know, he doesn't have the ball skills, but he's always setting the right kind of leverage when you need him in coverage. He's maintaining inside leverage. He's helping against the run. He's doing the extra work, and he has a great rapport with Minkah Fitzpatrick. Why ruin that when he's not that expensive to keep around? Just my opinion there. But there's another question that involves the secondary and the secondary's free agent moves that I think is interesting. Here's Dean from Prescott, Arizona, with a question on the secondary and especially Patrick Peterson.
Hey, Chris, this is Dean with up in Prescott, Arizona. Just read that the Steelers signed Patrick Peterson to a 2-year contract. I was just wondering if you think that this would bolster the chances of them taking a cornerback with the first pick or the 32nd pick to learn behind Patrick Peterson for the next 2 years. So that way, after he goes, we have a solid CB1 that's been training under one of the best for the past decade. Just want to know your thoughts. Love the show. Have a good one.
Thank you, Dean, for your question. Appreciate you because you've called in more than a couple times with good questions. So let's get to the crux of this question here. Yes, I do think the Steelers do draft a cornerback, but also I think it's interesting to look at now. If you're watching on YouTube, you saw the card that I always put up. I always put up images and the person's name and where they're from, and then I put a player or two in the pictures there for you to see. Now, if you were watching on YouTube, I wonder if you could obviously recognize Patrick Peterson was the one cornerback I had up, but the other cornerback, do you know who that was? That was TCU cornerback Travius Hodges Tomlinson, and he's a guy who was very adept at making plays on the football when it was in the air. He was aggressive. He's small, but it would be a very interesting slot option that the Steelers could probably take as high as a late day 2 pick to as low as your 4th round pick if he's still somehow sitting around there. But the reason I chose him is because I agree the Steelers should get another cornerback that learns under this group because they have a lot of veterans, and Patrick Peterson is a good leader to sit atop those veterans and kind of set the tone for everybody else. But the Steelers just signed back James Pierre on a Tuesday afternoon, which was something that I said was going to happen for months on the show. I was like, they're bringing him back. No one's going to pay top dollar for James Pierre just yet. He's going to come back on a cheap deal. It's going to come back again. They like his special teams work. They like him as a pinch hitting corner. That's perfect. They'll make that work. But you look at the Steelers roster right now. Patrick Peterson at cornerback, Keller Witherspoon, Levi Wallace, James Pierre, and Arthur Maulet. 4 of those guys are outside corners. Essentially, you are set there now. Arthur Maulet at slot corner, you like his heart, but he's just not that kind of a playmaker who can be a game changer. He's a good fill-in piece that's a glue piece that fits in between everybody else. But the reason I put in a Travius Hodges Tomlinson, I also could have put Emmanuel Forbes because they are guys who have really good ball skills, really good athleticism, and could play in the slot and be very interesting with this crew. And they still could get an outside corner. I think this is a great corner class, and the Steelers should consider one. And heck, if one of them falls to them, they should absolutely jump all over that and be like, all right, we'll figure it out later. But I'd even consider double dipping at corner if, say, like Devin Witherspoon falls to at 17, and then suddenly you're sitting there in the 3rd and 4th round, and you're like, man, this is a really good slot corner who can boost our secondary, and that's the highest value we have on the board left. Double dip, go get it, make it happen, make your secondary elite. Do what you got to do. But I think that's the key that the Steelers need to tap into there is that, yes, get a young cornerback that's going to learn, but if you get a really talented slot guy, especially in like the middle rounds there, I think it would do a lot for their secondary. It would give them another person, and again, a slot guy with really good ball skills who can help with the turnover game and help win bad balls out of the air. we've said all along, I think the emphasis for this team is not as much anymore keep the play in front of you, tackle, and then just play for the next down, because that did work for a long time in the NFL. But I think with all the high-level passing offenses and the rules of today's game, you can't just do that all the time. You need turnover players. And, for example, Hodges Tomlinson has 5 interceptions in the last 2 years. I think that's the direction that they're going. And I think it just makes sense to get a young cornerback to take advantage of having a young corner who could come in and learn behind Patrick Peterson and alongside several other veterans who have already done the job. We got more mailbag questions coming up. Stay tuned right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Got more I want to talk to you guys about here for questions that have been piling up on our desk here. But before we do any of that, I'd love to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at Ultimate Football GM, which is your chance to be an NFL GM in this mobile game that you can play right on your phone. You can do it online, you can do it offline, but the whole point is be a great GM, build a team from the ground up, pick the name, the colors, the city you represent, the team, everything that you want, build your facilities up, your stadiums, your scouting reports, hire and fire your coaches, your staff, make roster decisions, trades, draft things, and then get your team out there and see if they can win championships. And it's a game. It doesn't take that long to play. I played a season as fast as 5 minutes. Your goal is to play 25 seasons as a GM. And if you're able to win championships, you stick around. If not, then your job's in trouble. But it's very realistic in the sense that it gives you challenges all throughout the season that you have to address as a GM. I loved playing this game. I had a lot of fun in my 25 seasons. I got 19 championships. If you think you can do better, go download this game right now and prove me wrong by visiting ultimate-gm.com or look the game up in app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. And Locked On Steelers listeners, you can get a 100% free boost onto the franchise of your franchise by using the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On in the game store. That'll give you a 100% free boost on all your stats when you downloaded the game. But again, to download the game, check in your app stores for Ultimate Football GM. Also, you can download the game at ultimate-gm.com. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing to take your mailbag questions here on the show that you've called in. Again, you can call that show. You can call into the show 412-223-6644. Leave us a name with your leave us a voicemail with your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. And we're gonna jump to a question from our man Nathan Glass. Now, let me tell you, shout out to my man Big Nate. Nate, you be leaving a lot of questions. I do apologize that I can't always get to you. But you know, I know you listen to the show every day, and I really appreciate you. So, Nate, here's your question up, and it's about the linebacker additions and what I think about them compared to where the Steelers have been. Here's Nate from California.
How you doing, Chris? Nate Glass from California. I just got a question about the Cole Holcomb signing at middle linebacker. Chris, did we upgrade or did we downgrade? Losing Robert Spillane, I'm curious. Maybe you can reach out to the, Locked On Commanders guy, see what he got to say about this guy. I heard he played 7 games, had a season-ending injury, but hopefully he can come back from that. But mainly the question is, man, did we upgrade or we downgrade? Your thoughts? Thanks for my call. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Nathan, for your call, and we'll try to keep up the good work here. Let's talk about this, because the question is, did the Steelers upgrade or downgrade at linebacker? And let's be clear, I think the linebacker room is still not complete yet. I still think they are going to make a move there in the NFL draft, and that will complete the room. But the linebackers last year were Myles Jack, Devin Bush, Robert Spillane, Mark Robinson, and Marcus Allen filling in. So maybe they also could add 2 more linebackers if they want. Right now, the linebacker room is Cole Holcomb, who comes from the Commanders, and like Nathan pointed out, he did not finish the year healthy. He had a foot injury, but I think the Steelers, in doing their due diligence, they probably cleared him, and he's good to go. You have Elandon Roberts, the Dolphins linebacker. But both of those guys are guys that play downhill, that are physical against the run, and I'd say Cole Holcomb's a little better against the pass than Elandon Roberts, I believe. I still have to look more at Elandon Roberts' tape to break him down completely, but from what I have watched and had time to see, I think that they both fit that mold, that they can help against the run and maybe not be as effective against the pass, and they still need to get a guy who is, which is why I think that this would be a good time to use one of those second-round picks to go get a guy like that in the NFL draft, like a Jack Campbell, like a Drew Sanders, like a Trenton Simpson, guys who are really good athletes, can move and can cover on the field. Those are different things that you could do at linebacker. But, again, to get back to Nate's question, did the Steelers improve? I'd say that they improved over Robert Spillane. But I struggle to say that they improved over Myles Jack. I think that they'll have improved over Devin Bush simply for the fact of I think all these guys are going to be a little bit more detail-oriented than he is, and they're going to be better at attacking the run and taking on blockers. I think that's going to be certainly a factor that plays in here. But for the linebacker position, Myles Jack was going to be making, I believe, $13 million a year, maybe $11 million a year. I may be overinflating that, but he's going to be making a lot of money, and this is a guy who did lead the team in tackles, but had no interceptions, no forced fumbles, no fumbles recovered. And this Steelers team needs to create turnovers if they're going to be paying people that kind of money. And he had a knee injury. He didn't exactly finish the year healthy. I think this was more of just a tough spot where they had to figure some things out. And they got some good veterans who could come in and do basically what Myles Jack was kind of doing. And by doing that with Myles Jack kind of doing, they're not taking up all of Myles Jack's money, salary cap space in one person. And so, again, they can draft a rookie or two, throw them in there, see what happens with Mark Robinson. And then at the end of the day, you got a more steady linebacker room. So, yes, they did upgrade. But I think it was more in the steadiness of having two guys at the top of the line who could both be solid at what they kind of do and give you that depth option, but they still need to add to it. So I don't think that story's done yet. Last question here comes from our man Andy in Plains, Pennsylvania, who asks, not a Steelers question, but about an AFC North rival who made a big move. Here's Andy.
Hello, Chris Carter. This is Andy in Plains, Pennsylvania. And my question now is concerning the Cincinnati Bengals. They have already put together a really good offensive line, but now they picked up probably a top 3 tackle in Brown. And I'm wondering if you think that changes things on us rushing Joe Burrow so much, or if we're going to have to rush more against them. I look forward to hearing your response. Love the show. Keep it up. Bye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we will keep it up. So he's right. The Bengals made a huge move to go get Orlando Brown, offensive tackle, Super Bowl champion, and multi-time Pro Bowler from the Kansas City Chiefs. Also played for the Ravens before. They brought him in 4 years, $64 million. Really big contract, really big deal because they do want to protect Joe Burrow. And make no mistake, yeah, I think that's a really big move there. And Orlando Brown brings a lot of experience. I think he's going to be an interesting pickup there, but I don't think this changes anything. I still think you're going to let an offensive tackle scare TJ Watt? No. What are you talking about? They're going after that guy. And he's probably going to line up on the left tackle spot, I believe. I haven't looked at their depth chart entirely, but either way, him and I think Watt and Alex Highsmith, they can give it to Orlando Brown. And yes, he's high paid and he has a high pedigree. But if you go to Pro Football Focus, and you don't have to even look at their grades, just go to Pro Football Focus, go to by position, click offensive tackles, and click blocking. And then when you go through there, look up who's allowed the most pressures from last season, according to offensive tackles by position. And it is none other than Orlando Brown Jr., who is now going to be playing for the Cincinnati Bengals. That and on top of the Bengals' 10th overall pick just a few years ago, Jonah Williams, who's an offensive tackle who's supposed to be the kind of the pillar of the group, he has requested a trade since they've signed him. It is not all sunshines and rainbows over there, and I don't think that they've necessarily solved their offensive line problem. I don't think they really solved it last year either. I think that in the first game, you saw what a healthy TJ Watt and a healthy Steelers defense that wasn't tired out because the offense was sending them back out there every play for four straight weeks. I think you saw what they could do to that offensive line last year. And then the second time they met, TJ Watt was just coming off his injury. That team was dealing with a lot at the time. The offense was still kind of putting them out there a lot. There was a lot that was going on there. When those two teams were fresh, ready to go at the start of the season, that Steelers pass rush ate Joe Burrow alive. And I don't think adding Orlando Brown is going to stop that next year. I think the Bengals are still going to be a very dangerous team. Don't make it sound like I'm trying to say that, oh, they're nothing. I think that they're going to be a team to reckon with. They're still probably going to win the AFC North. I think that the Steelers are going to battle with them, but I could see the Steelers splitting with them again this next year, just like they did last year. And I think that if someone's scared of Orlando Brown because he's a big name in free agency and probably you saw his rating in Madden was really good or something, I would not let that intimidate you if you're a Steelers fan, because the Steelers have some of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And I think they have the best pass rusher in the NFL because his name is TJ Watt. And if he's healthy, I'd be watching out for him. So, yeah, I mean, still, the Bengals are the top dogs. They've been the top dogs in the division for 2 straight years. There'll be someone the Steelers have to get after. But I wouldn't change up a single thing about my strategy to do so, because I think the Steelers are building towards something that could make them the top dogs again very soon. That's all we have time for today. Thanks so much for all the mailbag questions who called in. Keep calling in, keep leaving voicemails. We will try to keep working you guys in more regularly into the show. I apologize for not being able to do that as much while I was on the road. Again, just complications, just trying to make sure we're getting the daily content out while I'm traveling and doing my job at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. By the way, if you want to read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, go to post-gazette.com, subscribe there, and you can get all of my content there. I cover the Pitt Panthers. We also have several Steelers writers on the beat that are awesome. I talk to them all the time there as well. So check out the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and all our work there. I'm back in Pittsburgh. I just went to Pitt football camp, and there's some really good guys. I was also talking to some of the Pitt football NFL draft prospects who were at practice on Tuesday. Lots of stuff there. But anyways, again, thanks for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Check out my work here in the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Also, watch this video on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. And if you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. You both at the same time in Apple Podcasts. I'll get you a shout out at the end of the show because we appreciate that kind of love. Thanks again to everyone for joining. My man Tony Serino is back for a Thursday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Tune in for that, and then we'll finish the week, of course, with Jenna Harner. Maybe the Steelers will make more free agency moves. You can find all of that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.